Hi, I'm Nat. You might know me as Ashes for Foxes.
I'm Erin, also known as Holocroning.
And I'm Shy. You guys might know me as Botsy.
And you're listening to Metamashina, a bi-weekly podcast on genre fiction from the feminine gaze. Here we go, guys. So, to get into what we'll be talking about, we would like to just kind of tell you where we're coming from. And so, I would like to know, do you remember when you could discuss genre fiction for its merits without your gender being dragged into it?
No, not really.
Not especially.
Do you remember when having narratives that speak to the female experience were uncontroversial?
No, not that either.
Not ever since the, fuck. I was gonna make a Twilight joke.
No, go ahead and make Twilight jokes. That's fine.
Keep it in! Hold on, let me think of something to say to that. You mean when all narratives catered to the male experience?
You mean like forever?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
That's perfect. Remember when you could enjoy fiction for what it was instead of being pulled into a neoliberal fandom hellscape where every piece of literature is deemed problematic and needs to be trashed lest it corrupt the triggered children?
There was a brief time on angelfire.com maybe back in 2003, but for the most part,
Before
no.
Live Journal?
There was a period. There was a period where you actually were
Web 1.0. It was
Web
it
one,
was,
yeah,
It was,
yeah.
it was no man's land. It was no man's land for a short, brief time. But
where fan fiction was on separate sites.
Yeah, where you had your own GeoCities account with MIDIs playing and GIFs. I remember the
I'm
days.
terribly dated myself.
So I'd like to just briefly explain what Metamashina is to us. We're going to be using this podcast as a way to explore all things sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. But we also want to delve into different types of media associated with these genres, whether it's TV shows, films, books, comics, video games, anime, even podcasting, and also discussing the fandom around them as well. We're not really interested in being on the spoiler hype train, although all of us are kind of obsessed with them, but it's just not going to be the focus of our podcast. We're going to be looking more at all sci-fi and fantasy, past and present, going into older and earlier franchises to kind of examine the different ways of representation has happened, examine the ways in which female voices have been elevated or have been crushed, which is sadly usually the latter. I can cut that part.
It's fine. We can cut lots.
Yeah.
It's true, though. No, and it's just... I think we should also state, too, and be clear up front that going into this podcast, before we start ranting and really diving into the topic, that we want to be clear that our perspectives are informed by our individual opinions and identities, and we're also limited by that.
And that's a very important point to kind of put up here at the beginning, is that they are very, very much limited by them. So when we do talk about this stuff, we will try to dredge up the principles of narrative storytelling. We're going to focus on sociological and psychological precepts which inform them. But we also want to keep our genre fiction standing on track. We're going to focus on the text, hopefully.
Hopefully. I thought it might be a little bit of a tall order knowing us, but we'll try.
Yeah, when you're so heavily involved in fandom, it's kind of hard to miss the worst of the worst. So I'm going to go into my introduction here. A little bit about me. This is Nat again. I'm a lifelong fangirl living in Portland, Oregon. I have a cat named Bones. You'll hear him in the recording sometimes. I'm sorry, he's loud. I've been he's kind of a dick.
Humping pillows, among other things.
Yeah, he has a girlfriend now, so I think he's doing better. He's gotten over his obsessive need for masturbation, much like every teenage boy does.
Well, at least one of us has.
Yeah.
At least one of us.
Well, I know. I think maybe it was, I don't know if I was influencing him or something. I don't let him watch. So.
Oh my God, I'm dying.
And so after joining Tumblr about 2 years ago, I've really become aware of my inability to stay away from train crashes and ambulance chasing, because fandom as itself, as it stands right now, is a lot different than when I was younger, when I was on stuff like LiveJournal or, talking in group chats about, role-playing Dragon Ball Z. That will age me and make me feel like...
Wait, you just said you role-played Dragon Ball Z?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, let me guess. You role-played, I want to say Vegeta, but I feel like it was Trunks.
Well, I would be roleplaying like Bulma typically, because Vegeta and Bulma are like one of the best couples in anime ever. Seriously. But yeah, no, I had a thing for Trunks. You got me.
We all did.
So I've also been a co-host on my friend Jeremy's podcast, which is called Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person. It's based here locally in Portland, and along with my good friend Garrett and some other awesome guests, we usually talk about all sorts of nerd shit. Everything from progressive rock to political machinations, because we are very much a leftist podcast. I am the wrong person to be on that podcast, so that's where I think where the name comes from, because I absolutely cannot quote anything for the life of me. I'm also the wrong person probably to be hosting this in that sense, but I do love podcasting and I consume the media at a great rate, and I think it's a very fun environment to speak through, and I think it's also a lot more accessible than being online in general. And how about you, Erin?
So I am sort of a hermit and recluse living in Texas. I know you guys can't see me, but I'm pale as shit because I don't leave my house.
Vampire.
I move around a lot. Recently moved back here to Texas from New York. I have been into nerd culture most of my life. I think the first franchise that I really latched onto was probably Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the late 90s.
Nice.
I also really liked Xena. A little bit of X-Files, but I was younger then, so I couldn't appreciate it as much, I don't think, in the 90s as I can now, watching it retroactively. But in the early 2000s, I sort of moved into anime, fan fiction, gaming, role-playing, and, general Web 1.0 culture. And then I took a long break from fandom for probably 10 or 12 years while I was in high school and then university, and then got dragged back into the scene by The Force Awakens, kicking and screaming. I didn't really have a choice. It compelled me. So,
Same.
So my Tumblr handle is holocroning, and I don't really use Twitter, so that's probably the best place to find me.
My name's Shai. I'm Otzi online. And basically, I've been involved in fandom for a really, really long time. And I'm an illustrator and documentation specialist, like currently based in DC. I'm the lone Canadian on this show. So I was trained, before I started doing this and getting involved in blogging and podcasting, I was trained in video game development. And I got my degree in illustration and creative writing. And when I was doing that, when I was getting trained, I started focusing on literary theory and criticism, which is where my love of meta and deconstructing text come from. So I'm currently working with illustration still, and other creative ventures. And I've been involved with comics and the convention circuit in the past, and as mentioned, a lot of independent blogging. Unlike Nat and Aaron here, podcasting is pretty new for me, and so we'll see how it goes. We'll see how I stick it out.
We'll see.
It might be a little bit rough.
We shall see. Yeah. No, I think that not being familiar with podcasting is probably a benefit, actually, because again, it's about conversations.
Yeah, I haven't participated in many podcasts here and there, but I have been listening to quite a few for a while, so definitely have been lurking that circuit, but not really participating. So I'm excited to get our own going.
Awesome. So, let's go back to talking about how we all met. I'm sure people aren't really that interested in it, but I am, because I think it's quite funny that we all kind of got dragged back into fandom at kind of a reasonably mature age. I know I had been off and out of it for a long time as well, just like Aaron was. And when The Force Awakens came out, I pretty much fucking went off the cliff into Tumblr.
Yep.
And
swan dive.
Yeah, and it was a very rude awakening on what had changed since the old Life Journal and days when everybody was kind of trying to be fun and have fun and make fun stuff. Now it is definitely a tormented hellscape on Tumblr, and we've seen it all. But I also
it's a lot more formal and organized than it ever used to be too.
Yeah, it is definitely, and I think a lot of it too is that the culture has changed quite a bit. I mean, we've seen it directly, but for outsiders, I think it's best explained that there's a lot of divisiveness in how people feel fandom should operate, or how
I think it's important, like, because we started talking up about this is like, we should talk about how we met, right?
Yeah.
And like people might not necessarily be interested in it, but my take on it and the reason why I think it's important why we talk about it, like I think it's really important to acknowledge our public fandom origins.
Yeah.
And like within the context of Star Wars, because we have to be really, I think it's really important that the three of us, right off the bat, are cognizant and upfront as to how our role within that fandom in particular has changed over the past 2 years and how it plays into why we're doing this podcast. Like it's a core causation behind Metamashina.
Exactly.
So it's less about let's talk all about us and here is the origin story of of the Harpies shrieking over in the corner there.
Exactly.
So, essentially that's the way I would prefer to look at it.
Okay. Well, let's gush about how Star Wars changed our lives for better or worse. Aaron, did you want to start?
So, like I said earlier, I was in fandom for a while back in the early 2000s and stopped. But I think that so most of back then, like a lot of what I was doing was I was on animespiral.com and fanfiction.net, and I think back then, back when LiveJournal was just picking up, I think that a lot of fandom operated within MSN Messenger chats and in the comment threads of different fan fictions and things like that. So I started like getting into gaming, like long campaign games, Final Fantasy, Zelda, online role playing, like Gaia Online and things like that. But I gave up the vampire lounges and the kitsune masks for the real world. And then I saw The Force Awakens, and I was so intrigued by the dynamic between Rey and Kylo Ren that I wanted to see if anybody else was, I guess unsettled, because I thought that there was a romantic element between them, and it wasn't necessarily explicit. And as we've, elaborated at great length over the following 2 years, I think there was a lot of subtextual.
Absolutely, like very symbolic. It was.
Yeah, and so I essentially just wanted to know if anyone else was picking up on that. So I, a quick Google search brought me to Tumblr and brought me back into fandom. And at the time, I was active on Tumblr. I had a blog, but it was more like for shitty reblogs of shit posts, and then occasionally, aesthetic photography, whatever. But I was never really aware of the fandom community on Tumblr, and I never interacted with other bloggers. So I wasn't even necessarily aware that this, nerd culture and online fandom community of fanfic writers and artists and things like that. I didn't even really know that they had migrated to Tumblr from those other places that they existed back in the early 2000s. So that was kind of, just me going down the rabbit hole. I had no idea what I was getting into when I decided to make a Star Wars Tumblr blog, which was how I met both of you who were actively writing about said dynamic. I think I was lurking largely at that point, but Shai was already, I don't think she had written Death and the Maiden yet, but there was a Bastila and Revan meta that she had written, and one on Rey's parentage, and those were already floating around by the time that I started really dipping my toes in. And Nat, you had started writing some long form metas as well, and so I think just by reading those and messaging you guys and getting engaged with the rest of the bloggers in that community was how I just sort of fell into this gaping black hole of Star Wars fandom. And it totally took me by surprise. I was raised on Star Wars. My dad was always really big into the original trilogy. So I grew up watching that, and then went through the prequels era. And I really liked it because I guess I had never, because I'm in my 20s, so I had never gone through this whole fandom process of the original trilogy that so many other fans did. So I didn't necessarily feel so burned by the prequels. I thought that they were obviously cheesy in parts, but I really liked them. I remember seeing Revenge of the Sith for like my 15th birthday or something like that, and nice. but what put me off was the Disney acquisition, and I didn't expect that they would be able to carry the franchise well. I remember reading about the acquisition back in 2012 and being bummed and thinking, oh my God, they're going to ruin it, because although I wasn't active in the Star Wars community online, it has always been a very near and dear series to me. And so I had only watched the trailer for The Force Awakens one time before it came out. I remember going into the movie and I saw the poster, and I had heard the term Supreme Leader Snoke, and I saw Kylo Ren's mask, and I just assumed that Kylo
Supreme
was
Leader Snoke.
Yeah. And so
we should clarify that in terms of what each of us write meta about, you are notorious for writing meta about Snoke and Palpatine.
We need more Snoke and Palpatine meta. Okay.
I love Palpatine. I'm trying to bring Thrawn into that mix too, but I've been really lazy. But yeah, so I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't even really know that Rey was the protagonist. I didn't know any of the characters' names, hadn't followed any of the production, pre-production, or anything like that. And so I was excited when I went. I remember, slamming a beer before I went into the theater and being like, yeah, hell yeah, like Star Wars is back, and I was so excited. Yeah. And as soon as the opening crawl came on, I remember grabbing my friend and being like, oh my God. But yeah, I had no idea that it was about to consume my life.
Yeah.
Consume is definitely a word.
So, Shai, did you want to explain your origin too?
Sure. Like it's, as you both mentioned, we all have intersecting stories when it comes to how we got involved in the Star Wars fandom and fandom in general, and why it's important to Metamashina. And I promise, after my long, rambling little speech here, it will make sense. It will add up to this. And it's not just us talking about us, because it's an origin story of villains, I guess. I don't know. Like, I think I'm probably viewed as a villain online. I'm not sure.
I think I am too.
I have a feeling I'm viewed as a villain online. So I have no problem with that. But,
Same.
But I will speak for my own villainhood. So basically, I've been involved, as mentioned, I've been involved in fandom for a really, really long time, and into genre fiction basically since I was since a toddler, right? But up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I was basically just a lurker, and I would write fan fiction occasionally. I still do, but I didn't do much beyond that. But I consumed media a lot. Like I really consumed the media as it came out, whether it was video games or films or TV shows. Would read the blogs and the podcasts, and I went to and participated in conventions. And I also had developed this habit of watching fandom drama from like a really safe distance. Mm-hmm. So up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I knew about it explicitly, but I never actually got involved with it, because like, Jesus, who wants to deal with that crazy? And there is, I don't know if you guys remember. Do you remember the live journal era of Fandom Wank?
Yeah.
Okay, gosh, yeah, I used to follow that religiously, because it was a great repository for what happened.
I think I'd already dipped out by that point. I don't remember that.
It was a repository for what happens when you don't go outside the basement. So it was great that way. And up until 2-3 years ago, my experience in fandom was actually pretty good. Like it was kind of lonely, because I didn't really talk to anyone. And I'm very talkative. Right? Like I love interacting with other people, and I love it when they love the same things as me. But I also really like community, and I was missing this core feature of community that fandom offers. So when The Force Awakens came out, and I ended up really loving the film, I jumped at this opportunity to finally contribute to fandom and to genre fiction in a way that I thought was meaningful at the time. Mm-hmm. Notice I say at the time. I have different thoughts now. And I should also clarify that I didn't go into Star Wars planning this, right? I was really just disappointed with how the prequel trilogy panned out. I felt like it had a lot of lost potential, but that's a discussion for another time. So when I went to see The Force Awakens, I had literally rock bottom expectations. My brother dragged me to it, and I did not expect to get invested, but I did get invested. I got really invested, and I became, because I have this background or this history with literary theory and criticism, because that's what I basically studied for 4 to 5 years, and devoted my life to, and multiple rounds of coffee. I became really obsessed with The Force Awakens because of this subtextual dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey, and I wrote a bunch of meta about it, where the most notorious is Death and the Mating, and I got accidentally notorious for it. And through this accidental notoriety, I became friends with Aaron and Nat, who were going by Ashes with Foxes and Holocroning at the time, and we've been best friends ever since, essentially. But to get back to an earlier point that I was talking about, where I was saying I think it's really important to acknowledge our public fandom origins and their context with Star Wars, and how this plays into Metamashina. So we're talking about Star Wars right now, right? Like, it sort of definitely feels like it's a Star Wars sort of podcast. But Metamashina is not and will not become a Star Wars podcast. Like, I think it's really important that we state that.
There's plenty of Star Wars podcasts already out there.
Yeah, well, and they're great too, right? They're all really, I really like them. But when I say this isn't going to become a Star Wars podcast, and I think you guys will agree with me, is that we're all huge Star Wars fans and we love talking about it. But it's never been the only franchise, just like the singular franchise that we're interested in, and we want to talk about more than that. And I think that it's really important to clear up too that on some level, because of our heavy involvement with Star Wars, that there was this perception brewing for a really long time that we were monofans, or monofan is basically a fan of a singular fandom, and they don't get involved in any other aspect of genre fiction within the Star Wars franchise, which isn't true. And there was also this perception, up until maybe recently, I don't know, we've been actively trying to counteract it, in that that the dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey, or Reylo as it's known online colloquially, was the main focus for us when it came to Star Wars, which is also not true.
Absolutely not true.
Like, it's definitely something, like, on a personal level, like, I find that dynamic fascinating. But the most important parts of Star Wars universe for me is, like, one, basic storytelling continuity, because I'm a slut for storytelling. I should say that right up front.
We are all sluts for storytelling.
I think it's worth, like, interjecting here, just that I think, like, even the dynamic between the three of us, like, it didn't necessarily take off so much. I mean, I remember talking to you and you Shy and talking to Nat back in the early days of post Force Awakens life, but I think when we really started spitballing ideas with each other and really engaging with each other was when we realized we were all writers and we all loved storytelling and we were all working on novels. Yeah. And we all had similar backgrounds. We had all grown up on Web 1.0 with 4chan and, LiveJournal and shit like that. And so we realized we had a lot of commonality and we had a lot of things to talk about. And that's sort of how this whole idea evolved.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like, so storytelling is the common theme, and the common reason why, I think a main reason why we got interested in The Force Awakens, not necessarily specifically the dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey, but that is like a larger storytelling dynamic. And I think, and for me personally, I'm also obsessed with the Old Republic era of Star Wars, right? And that is my main focus. But as far as being mono fans go, I do think over the past, I don't know about you guys, but I've been pretty vocal about it online, to my own detriment, I guess. And we've done a lot over the past year, I guess, to dissuade people of this notion that we are mono fans. Not that it really matters, because once you're online, people will make their perceptions about you, whether it's the truth or not, whether you have, reams of receipts proving them wrong or not, they will still make their own perceptions about you. And that's one thing we have learned painfully over these past year and a half, right? And so, yes, we have tried to say, no, we're not mono fans. Then no, this is not a podcast that is going to be about Star Wars and nothing but Star Wars. I mean, it's about sci-fi and fantasy in general. But Metamashina is basically, we want to actively talk about, and I mean, I think you guys might agree with me, we want to talk about and celebrate and explore other media properties that have made us into the fans that we are today.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, there's, like, it's in many ways, Metamashina is an extremely self-indulgent project. I don't know if you guys have gotten that yet, but we've been talking for like about 30 minutes now about our origin stories, so it's extremely selfish. But we derive enjoyment about talking about like these other sci-fi franchises. It is absolutely a soapbox for things that we love from the female fan perspective. And I can't speak for you guys, but you probably will agree with me on this one, because gosh, we agreed on so many things. I mean, I'm not interested in kowtowing my desire for female narratives in fandom to placate fanboys. And I'm not interested in making sure that these narratives are kosher to placate the late stage neoliberal purity politics that you see within fandom these days as a response to male-centric story domination. you know? Like,
just to touch on one of the points you made a second ago, just about, you know, the whole other franchises thing. Like, yeah, I think it's absolutely important that we mention how we all came to be involved in this facet of fandom and how we came to want to discuss these things. You know, I love Star Wars. I'll always love Star Wars. I'm excited as hell about The Last Jedi, but there's so much media to consume and so many things to talk about. I think, you know, we've been doing it for so long on a daily basis anyway, because we're so passionate about all of these other franchises and, you know, Star Wars included, but there's just so many shows, books, anime, manga, you know, everything that we're all just consuming all the time. And like you, Shai, and I know, Nat, you're a media hound as well. Mm-hmm. We all three of us just love consuming new content and thinking about it and really sinking our teeth into it. And we've just been spitballing these ideas with each other and shooting the shit about all of these different shows and books, etc., for the last year and a half, that I think we wanted to move it into a more formal medium, because for one, it's cathartic in a way to have it organized all into one place.
Yeah.
And it's productive and emotionally satisfying, first and foremost for us. And, you know, because like I said, we've been doing it on our blogs and through our chats for so long now. But, you know, we're hoping that other people will derive enjoyment in hearing about these topics, especially within, you know, sci-fi and fantasy genres. These genres have traditionally been very male dominated, and slowly but surely, I think female narratives and the female voice has been trickling in to these spaces, and sort of, or not even trickling, more like kicking the door down. But, you know, we're just sort of hoping, I think, to become a stepping stone towards making these genres more open, welcoming, and enjoyable for women like us. And so we hope that our listeners enjoy hearing our take, because we hope that maybe it's you know, slightly different from a lot of the stuff that you guys have been hearing for a long time.
Yeah, essentially we were really aiming to get you to love the stuff that we love and explain why we love it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, address some of the criticism, not all of it, about certain texts. Because I know that we're all deeply invested in other franchises. We're never motivated to write 10,000 word metas on some of them, you know. It's
Hey now. Okay.
No. So, and
there.
I want to address the topic of meta just in terms of trying to unpack it a little bit for people that aren't familiar with the concept, because I wasn't before I joining Tumblr.
I wasn't either.
December 2015.
I studied economics.
Yeah, I was an engineering major. I did not do any liberal arts education, even though I'm deeply, deeply obsessed with narrative storytelling and symbolic function in it.
Likewise.
When I was first going online to, after having the same exact experience you guys did with The Force Awakens, where I went in and I just remember sitting there with my two girlfriends on either side of me. And then as soon as Kylo takes off the mask, my friend's like, he's the fucking hottest villain ever. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so ashamed of myself right now. But then I was like, why would they make you feel ashamed about yourself to like a villain? Why I have these confusing feelings right now? But I've always really liked villains, so it's hard for me. I empathize with the darker characters because I feel that they perform more of an interesting function in storytelling than people that don't have difficulties with, like killing their father. So,
wait, what?
So anyway, that led me online and to Tumblr, and obviously found Shai's work and was like obsessed. And I was like, I can do this too. I can write a bunch of words and try to explain why I think this is, like my focus was a heroine's journey, because I feel like what Erin said's absolutely correct. We have had a dearth, like a lack of female storytelling, right? Or female-centered storytelling within a lot of the genre fiction that we consume. Or if it's in there, it's written by men and it's written weird, like with all the great things that men do to women characters. So I was like, this is a story made for the feminine gaze, and that's a hill that I apparently went to die on for the last 2 years, because I've been on Tumblr and on Reddit and on other forums just talking about this, just because the response to it that I saw online, or like even just the concept that this is Rey's story and that it's her, it's her journey, not Luke's, which everybody apparently thinks. I just got a little bit obsessed and, obviously spat out a couple of metas.
In terms of meta, though, so when I was doing meta, when I first started writing meta, as you mentioned, a lot of people I took a risk by getting my degree in creative writing. Like, gosh, like what? Most people don't do that, right? But the meta is basically, for people that aren't familiar with the term meta and what it means, when we say we wrote meta, we're talking about meta or writing 10,000 words of meta. So meta is basically a concept which is derived from another concept, usually to add to a discussion, and it's self-referential, abstract, theoretical topic, and it can veer from the mundane. So I think Kylo Ren and Rey like each other, or and that's why I ship them to the academic.
Wait. Did you just use ship and academic in the same sentence? I thought this was a professional podcast.
I did. Fight me.
You can be academic and ship stuff. I think it's totally mutual.
No, I'm being totally facetious.
No, I know.
So it will go from the mundane to the academic, right? So so it can be mundane. Mundane meta would be like saying, okay, I think these two characters like each other, so that's why they should bang. To the academic, saying, okay. So no, this is totally serious. I studied this shit, but to the more academic meta essays, which was what you were doing, Nat, what I was doing, in terms of saying, okay, these two characters have a connection because of all this symbolism that's been put in play to the and meta can also be satirical. It can be poking fun at the original source material, right?
Absolutely.
And that's basically what meta is. So a good example. So it's a text that is referencing itself, So it cannot exist without that reference or that abstraction. And that is what people started writing before even 2 years ago, right?
I think it's always existed in fandom. I think it's just the visibility of it.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Lord of the Rings fandom. Notorious for it.
No, the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
The Silmarillion fandom is notorious for it, which I'm also part of, but I don't actually write meta for them. No, they scare the shit out of me, man. They scare the shit out. Okay, if you God forbid you don't go along with the established headcanons of the entire fandom, because you will be pilloried and they will expect you to reference 13 obscure texts in the exact same spot, and to back it up with your university degree on top of that.
And it has to be in Elvish.
Yes, actually it does. And don't you dare use the wrong type of Elvish. So I can't. They actually do have some really good meta. It's to the point where it's too serious for my tastes. so I'm not going to get involved in it, right? Sorry, I spat at my own drink there. But that is what we have. That is for the other meta. Sorry, I'm rambling.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so we were just saying that it had existed in other fandoms. It wasn't Star Wars meta wasn't a brand new concept or anything like that, but it is very specific to fandom life, I think.
Yeah. And I think one of the qualities of meta that makes it more, for me, a lot better than all of these, stupid 500-word articles by some website that's not even, a fandom website. It's, a shitty newspaper. Yeah.
Clickbait.
Yeah, clickbait shit.
BuzzFeed's current obsession, are you a clownfucker? Yes or no?
Yes.
Doubt, guys.
We'll definitely have to touch more on that subject because it is hilarious. Will. But I think a lot of it is that it's from a place of love, and it's an organic kind of development of somebody's interest. It's somebody in fandom trying to contribute positively and create something that has meaning for them. That's actually a celebration of the text itself. Mm-hmm. And getting into the deeper cuts when it comes to related stories or related, looking at the fandom as a whole in terms of a perception of that specific text. That is what is more interesting to me, because it acknowledges that there's creators and their creations, but they're the fans, the people that appreciate it. They do serve a positive function, not just to consume, but to also produce content based on it. So I think that has a lot of value. So I also think in regards to meta, why we had such a passion for it is because a lot of the perspectives that we were seeing online were very male-centered, especially around Star Wars, because traditionally it's been considered a male-dominated franchise. Like, the girls apparently don't want to, play with X-Wings or lightsabers.
Oh, God forbid.
God forbid. And there was also another little bit of a knee-jerky reaction to The Force Awakens, in that you found that more women seem to like it than men, and I think a lot of that has to do with the properties of the female gaze being kowtowed to in the text. I think for all of us, having tried to interact with the fandom at large, we can all safely say that men are fucking dicks about this shit.
The reason why we were doing meta, right? The reason why we were doing meta, and the reason why we're doing Metamashina right now, part, I should say. Like, it's not all bad. I know we've been ranting a lot, but it's not all bad. But part of the reason why this is being created, and part of the reason why we wrote metas in the beginning, we have a general disdain for the lack of female-centered takes in major franchises. And I should say personally, and sorry guys, I'm about to rant again. I rant a lot.
No, this is a ranting safe.
God, I can't stop myself. It just goes a mile a minute. So, like, I have very little patience these days towards the lack of female-centric narratives in major franchises. And my disdain towards the resistance to these female-centric narratives is growing. I have to be honest, it stems from my experience as a female fan actively operating within these online spaces over the past 2 years. Because, God, my experiences now versus what it was prior to 2 years ago is extremely different.
Extremely.
Like, and I should clarify before I continue this rant. I think I think all of us are pretty much on the same page with this, especially since we come from this. We grew up in the same era of fandom, more or less. Is that being a woman in a genre-based fandom or in a nerdy fandom of any sort, whether it's video games or anime or like TV or TV shows or comics, it has always been a crapshoot. It's always been a crapshoot. And despite this and the lack of female-centric narratives, there's actually a lot of really good old sci-fi and fantasy that's absolutely amazing, which is part of what Metamashina is about. Like, I wouldn't change these franchises. There's a lot of good, I mean, they're not perfect franchises. Nothing is perfect, which is what the neoliberal hellscape of Tumblr does not get. So nothing is perfect, right? But there was a lot of good that these old sci-fi and fantasy series did. And it gets lost in but the good that they do gets lost in the constant outrage machine of that neoliberal left and the old boys club who have ubiquitously decided that anyone who is not exactly like them deserves to be crucified. Because, like, you go online, it's like everything is terrible. Either you are destroying my childhood or everything is problematic. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, like, you take the wheel, right?
Yeah.
Because and why we have a growing disdain for this lack of female narratives, even though we love old sci-fi that doesn't have a lot of female narratives, is the reception I received to a perfectly reasonable request to improve genre fiction, whether it was sci-fi or fantasy, right? So I wanted to be on a personal level. I wanted to be allowed to enjoy an inclusive franchise like Star Wars, which actually caters to multiple audiences, but I wanted to be able to enjoy it from a female fan's perspective. I wanted to be able to contribute to the fandom and the creative world at large on a professional level. And I wanted my contributions to be judged on their individual merit, not my gender. And this was not a request to replace the male-centric narratives that were already there, by the way, because I'll still read those. It was this desire to have stories that I consider important to me and my experience included alongside theirs, And this completely reasonable request to share a very large fandom space was completely shot down. And it was extremely eye-opening how it was shot down. And the reaction over the past 2 years I received has been just like, I'm a changed woman. I'm a changed woman.
We all are.
So like, oh gosh, I'm a bitter woman.
I've aged so much.
I've aged 10,000 years. So women and the topics they like. For example, I hate to bring it up, but it's a perfect example. So Reylo, the dynamic between Kylo Ren and Rey, that topic was banned, en masse from entire forums under the oblique idea that whatever these women were talking about was shippy. Ergo feminine.
Yeah, Jedi Council forums outlawed the topic unless you're actively bashing it.
Yep, and it was not, and they decided it was not based in reason. And we were women were unrelentingly over the past couple of years. Women have been unrelentingly harassed and doxxed for trying to partake and enjoying these shared fandom spaces, including myself. I'm not going to get into all of the. That's a episode all on its own.
We won't get into the ugly details, but we can all say that we have experienced it personally.
It's been ugly, right? And crucial theories and essays and theoretical writing that women did first, went unsourced in major mainstream papers, was derided as fan fiction in these major papers. And there's nothing wrong with fan fiction, by the way. It's just it's a mischaracterization.
We love fan fiction.
And credit on these theories was often given to men who had stolen said research, like Mike Zero and his discovery of Reylo in Sun. Was a perfect example of this. And it's important to note, I mean, this happens in a lot of fandoms, but the judging of women's contributions based not on their individual merit, but on their gender and who these contributions cater to is like especially telling in the Star Wars fandom.
Yeah, it's endemic to pretty much all media, where women's interests and pursuits are derided as being lesser than the, so-called canon. And it's been going on since, the origination of the novel, when women were writing their own stories and being mocked by, not being literary enough, right? So
yeah, I would say that more than anything, like as much as I enjoyed the film, The Force Awakens, I think that the thing I've felt most passionately about coming out of this past year and a half is actually just the dynamics within the fandom itself, rather than the actual content, because I've become so frustrated by the double standards, the lack of inclusion for women, the scorn for the female gaze, the misogyny I've seen both on Reddit, on Tumblr, from men and women, because yes, internalized misogyny is a thing. It's absolutely just blown me away. And, part of the reason that I was so blown away by The Force Awakens was because of Rey as a protagonist. And as I saw a female Reddit user previously put, like, I thought I had been experiencing this franchise the same way as my male counterparts had until I saw The Force Awakens, and then seeing the narrative unravel through a woman's perspective sort of gave me this crazy epiphany where I realized how much I had been missing out and how I wasn't sharing that same experience. And then trying to bring that experience to the table in the online sphere of the Star Wars fandom. I mean, the door was just absolutely slammed in our face.
Yeah.
And it's
and like you said, Chai, I don't want to replace male narratives with female ones.
It's not a zero-sum game.
It's not a zero-sum game. I just want to see female narratives, the female gaze, theories that have originated with women. I want them to hold equal clout in the, creative sphere as a whole, as these male narratives and these male perspectives and these things that are coming out of male writers. And, it's part of the reason that things like the young adult genre have exploded and why fan fiction has become such a massive hobby and fraction of the web in the last 10 years, is because so much of the media output in our society doesn't indulge the female gaze, and women are starving for it. So like when they do experience it, like with The Force Awakens or Wonder Woman, or when something comes along and does it well, women latch onto it and it blows up because they don't get it and we're hungry for it. So we take to other mediums, writing fan fiction or blogging, reading, writing, whatever, because we want this, we crave it. And the tides have been slow to change, I think, with Hollywood and the online sphere. I mean, I think things are changing, but it's been a slow process and it's been really frustrating. And there's been a lot of people that have been kicking and screaming against it.
It's a slow process. It's a slow process. It's a frustrating process. And it's a process where there's no justice. Because, like, to tie it back into this, the fact that the reason why I said that the Star Wars fandom is a perfect example of women's contributions and women's stories being based not on their individual merit, but on their gender. The reason why I said that is because we presented this evidence, and we're not the only ones. So many women did this, like it's really important to note here too that yes, we wrote stuff. Yes, we have our own personal experiences, but they are definitely not unique. Like there
were lots of other women picking up on it, writing about it, talking about it.
Exactly. But the door was slammed on all of us.
We had to form our own community in order to share.
Because it's ridiculous, and there's more evidence, and within Star Wars, and within this idea of, as more evidence was introduced towards theories, it's more evidence was introduced over the years, by basically backing up theories that women were espousing. So like the idea of Reylo, or the idea that Rey is not a Skywalker. Previously male-dominated spaces that were hostile to these ideas have jumped on board the hype train and begun speculating about the exact same theories that women were speculating about. Only now, those theories are seen as fact instead of shipping. And it's also really fucking important to note that nothing about these theories has actually changed. Like, the canonical evidence being presented to support these theories is identical. And the only thing that's being revised is that these theories are now being espoused by men and being treated as legitimate there's no underlying cause for this legitimacy.
When they talk about it, it's theories. When we talk about it, it's shipping.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's no difference beyond gender difference. So and of who's saying this, right?
And if anything, I mean, Death on the Main was a 17,000 word highly cited dissertation, and these people are just shitposting on Reddit saying, "Oh, I think Kylo and Rey are going to bang," but like that holds more clout, then
and this is why I'm so confident and why I am so firm in saying that our experience and the experience of many other women and writing online we are being judged not on the merits of what we're saying, but on our gender, which is pretty fucking shit. Like there's I mean, we're tired of it. Like it stinks worse than fucking Pennywise in the goddamn sewers. Like, okay, we will talk about Pennywise in a second.
I can tell that you might be a secret clown fucker because you keep bringing it up.
Well, see, you doth protest too much, right? And like if there's one thing that this last 2 years have taught us, it's one that if we don't speak up, other people will speak for us.
Yeah,
they'll take credit. And the other thing too is that if you write, people try to ignore writing, whereas podcasting is actually a more accessible medium. So
yeah, I think that was like one of the qualms that I saw, that I witnessed with both, because you guys wrote. I mean, I wrote Snoke metas, but with both, but both of you guys who had written, widely linked and referred to metas, so many people just said, "Oh, I'm not going to read that. It's so long. Who would waste their time doing that?" And it's like, okay, so you don't appreciate that. That's fine. It's not like either of you were writing those things for other people. You were writing because you were passionate about it and you loved writing as a medium and it came from the heart, as you guys were talking about earlier. But yeah, podcasting just seems a lot more accessible of a medium. It's easier for people to just, put on a podcast and clean their room or take a drive or whatever than it is for them to sit down and decide, I'm going to read 10 or 20,000 words.
I'm sorry. Okay. I will never live down. I know I will never live down, Ash.
No, absolutely. I think that the reason we're drawn to doing this as a podcast is also because I think with writing, there's a bit of distance from the author in the perspective that that person is, even as personal as we made our metas, because we did talk about our personal experiences and our personal perspectives. It's just true that as a woman in fandom or any kind of culture that's around media, you do have to speak up because they will talk over you. And I think we're all very, very tired of that. And we have tried to contribute to the conversation on those forums like Reddit, and have been harassed and talked over. And, we have a lot of anger around that. But I think it has also been a good motivator for me, especially, to say, well, if they're going to talk over me, I'm just going to save my words and talk about how stupid they are on my podcast.
I mean, I think that's been the hardest lesson learned this past year, is that, because in the beginning, especially you and I, Nat, we spent so much time on Reddit, and I think it was with this false hope that people would listen to us.
Exactly.
And that we could, get our word in edgewise, and we could get these people to hear our perspective. But the fact of the matter is, if they don't want to hear it, they're not going to listen, and we shouldn't be catering or pandering to them. I mean, if they're not on board, then that's fine. We just are going to do our own thing and do this for us.
In our own space, yeah.
Yep.
It's really it's important to note that Metamashina and what we're doing right now and what we write about is definitely our own space, which is why it's a self-indulgent project. We're so you don't want to, these people don't want to share, and I think this is a very universal experience of a lot of women. And my own path is a little bit different from your guys because I never really tried to bridge the gap with the fanboys on places like Reddit. I was always like, it's a lost cause, and remember warning people repeatedly about that. But that doesn't change the fact that it still hit me hard too, right? So they have no interest in sharing a collective fandom space, and I mean, I think this is an experience that a lot of women realization that a lot of women come to, which is why you have a lot of spaces, especially fanfiction spaces, where it's predominantly women, because they've had to create their own spaces, right? And we've come to a similar conclusion as well, So yeah, we still love fandom, we still love these franchises, we still love sci-fi and fantasy, and we want to engage in it. So we are going to talk about it still, but we are going to do it outside of your so-called merit-based approval system, and we are going to do it in a way that is meaningful to us. And we're not really going to moderate that meeting. We're not going to basically say, well, we need to meet you halfway because you've already proven that you don't want to meet us halfway, so why should we?
Yeah. Don't pander to bigots. You don't want their good opinion anyway.
Well, and I think it's also worth noting that our qualms haven't just come from Reddit. I mean, I know other male fans that aren't interested in hearing a female fan's perspective. I think a lot of it has come from Tumblr too, and we've taken a few jabs, but I think the three of us have become so incredibly frustrated by this neoliberal culture that has grown to thrive on Tumblr within the last 5 years. You know, these ideologies, that the purity politics, this concept that, you know, this cinnamon roll culture where things must be certified
cinnamon
good.
roll
And
culture.
Cinnamon roll culture.
Oh my gosh. Well, cinnamon roll culture. Well, you know what the crazy thing about all of this is that technically speaking, we are all kind of, I guess it's going to come up often, but we're all kind of left wing.
Yeah, we're all
but
dirty leftists.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Is all three of us, are very left-wing people, I think, and obviously that's relative because Nat and I are American, and you're Canadian, and left-wing means two different things, you know, across borders. But I mean, still, like we're all more or less on the same page there. But on what Tumblr is doing is it's not left-wing. In fact, it's very steeped in hypocrisy, cognitive dissonance, internalized misogyny, and these concepts that you can liberate women by telling them what to do, telling them that they may only have interests that are good and pure, and that if they engage in darker parts of the psyche or want to write or draw or think about things like how they relate to villains, like Kylo Ren, for example, among many others, because this anti-villain, anti-culture is widespread across Tumblr. You know, it's very, very stifling in many different ways. For one, it's controlling of women. It polices women, their interests, their morals, their engagements, their sexuality, the way that
Their sexual histories.
That people
and traumatic
in the Victorian
histories
era.
too.
And on top of that, it's killing art, in my opinion, which is particularly offensive to me because as someone who clings to art as my only reprieve from this oftentimes cruel and brutal reality that we live in, I can't stand it because I think art is supposed to be a medium of self-expression and exploration, and whatever form it takes, telling people that they can only explore concepts through art that are safe, valid, and approved as good and pure, it sucks the life out of creativity. You know, we all know that as writers, and we've witnessed it multiple times within the Star Wars community. Even, for example, like professional contributors like Claudia Gray and Eric Mail. I don't know if that's how you say his last name, the artist. They've had their work policed, and it wasn't critiqued. It was policed by Tumblr. People making call-out posts saying that bloggers should boycott their books, their art, their work because it was deemed problematic, rather than actually providing any, you know, constructive.
Well, we should talk about.
Yeah.
We should talk about because I feel that. So we are talking right now about so we have problems with the fanboys gatekeeping stuff. That's one issue, and that's one reason why we're talking about why we created Metamashina. And the other side of the thing is the neoliberal antis. But like, if you aren't actually part of Tumblr, if you haven't actually been part of online space, people would not necessarily know what craziness we're talking about right now. Right?
I can kind of explain it.
See, the thing is, antis are an episode all on their own, right?
Right.
And we should definitely explain. So, like, Nat, why don't you explain for the people that haven't been part of this Tumblr hellhole?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
What antis are. I can talk about the historical part of them, but, like, let's just... Oh, gosh.
Well, the historical part's fun, because it goes back, you know, again, to the origination of the novel, but...
Victorian
for people that have been online in the last 10 years, I mean, everybody has seen this really weird shift into what we call... We use the word neoliberal a lot, just because it explains how people are obsessed with the surface of the thing, rather than the underlying ideology. So people were concerned about representation in media. They were concerned about, you know, how women were portrayed and how they were treated as female characters.
People of color.
You know, and it kind of reflects that whole shift in movement within modern leftism that was very, very fixated on identity politics and on, you know, kind of basically policing their own, and also call out culture. I mean, we've all seen that. It got really bad within 5 years ago or so. And it's been there's been a large backlash within the leftist communities about that, because it was just completely destructive for any cohesion or solidarity with people. So a good reference for that is the essay called Exiting the Vampire Castle by Mark Fisher. He unfortunately committed suicide a few years ago, but he had been experiencing that directly within the political landscape and wanted to comment on the fact that it was destructive, not constructive for movement.
Are you going to link that in the show notes?
Yeah,
because people
absolutely.
should honestly really read that. It's a fantastic essay, by the way. And like as Nat said, it's talking about more than just fandom, but it totally plays into fandom.
Yeah.
And the way that fandom has kind of imploded upon itself in the past couple of years and continues to do so. And I think it's important to note so yes, we are super biased when we're talking about this. Let's say that up front, because we have been on the receiving end of this bullshit. Oh gosh. But so it's important to talk about the history of how basically this whole anti-movement is a mutation of an actual problem that should have been solved. So as we mentioned before, fandom, or being a female fan within fandom, or being a minority fan within fandom, where most things cater to you if you're a white, straight male, was a crapshoot. And there's a lot of gatekeeping involved. A lot of, this narrative is only my narrative and you can't speak to other narratives. So in answer to this gatekeeping and the lack of representation for fans who were not the hegemonic majority,
the Luke Skywalkers,
the farm boys, as Nat mentioned, over the past, I think it's 10 years. It's been 10 years now. I think it's been really bad over the past 10 years. There was the rise in the anti-movement. And the anti-movement doesn't exist just on Tumblr, but that is their stronghold. That is their Mount Doom.
That's their vampire castle.
That's their vampire castle. Tumblr is the vampire castle. So it's a collection. Basically, the anti-movement is a collection of ostensibly, they are supposed to be left-wing fans who are basically, they are driven by this black and white way of seeing the world, where they believe that because old systems of power are bad, which they are, those pieces of media that were created within this old system must be bad as well, and therefore deserve to be punished. And this includes people that like those pieces of media. As mentioned, the origins of this movement were probably stemmed from a good place at one time. They were interested in advancing the plight of people that didn't have their stories being told, right? But in its current iteration, anti-fandom is this extreme distortion of social justice that has turned into this Victorian purity politics wank. And instead of just attacking systems of power, they disproportionately attack other women. They attack other fans who are not in positions of power for not being and enforcing utopian, outdated ideals of female virtue. And it exacerbates the very problem that they are trying to solve. It's a really in-depth topic, this whole anti-things. As Nat mentioned, there's the Vampire Castle, which everyone should definitely read.
We can dedicate an episode to it entirely.
It's an episode
because we should. It would be wonderful to read some of the lovely posts that the antis have written.
Yeah, but it's important. It's important to note that all three of us, that we've run out of patience to deal with both the gatekeeping old boys club and this neoliberal Vampire Castle. Because neither of them stem from a place of positive constructive criticism. And positive constructive criticism is the desire to give feedback in order to improve a piece of media instead of punishing it. And that's not what they're doing at all.
And it's impossible to attempt to have those discussions in a lot of the mediums that exist to us now, because the two primary places that people like to discuss these things are Tumblr and Reddit, and like we've said, both of them we've experienced huge issues with both, and that's why we're creating this space, because we need somewhere
to vent
all our own.
Yeah.
I gotta ask you guys a question because I've been referencing it a little bit. This leads perfectly into a great example of current media franchises. All the drama about people wanting to fuck Pennywise. Can we talk about that? I know we've been serious for a bit, but I really want to talk about
this is serious. This is a serious subject.
All right, sorry, Nat, I'll leave it back to you. I really want to talk about.
No, I think that's a perfect segue, because obviously when we all saw that antis had infected the It fandom on Tumblr, we were all laughing so hard,
falling out of our chairs.
Yeah, seriously, it's hilarious.
People are out here trying to actively police the horror genre fandom and call them problematic for liking things like killer clowns. I saw, I think one of the most famous screenshots going around right now is some anon went into someone's inbox on Tumblr and said something to the extent of, "How can you like Pennywise? He's like an intergalactic demon murder clown that literally eats children, right?" And the blogger responded and was like, Okay, do I need to sit you down and tell you that this isn't real? Horror is a genre, and just because I like an intergalactic child-eating demon clown in my free time on the internet doesn't mean I'm going to go out and become one and act like that in society.
It's really interesting because the thing with Pennywise, what I find really truly interesting about it, I guess we should also talk about like what we actually think about the Stephen King's It and Pennywise the clown too. But what I find really interesting is, so for those of you who have not seen the remake or even the original of It, so if those of you who have not seen the recent remake of It, essentially takes place in the town of Derry. There's a bunch of kids who find out that the spate of children going missing is due to this, as aforementioned, intergalactic demon clown who feeds off fear and likes to eat kids, right?
And hang out in the sewers.
And hang out in the sewers, exactly. And we'll get to the people that want to fuck this clown in a second. But that's another issue. But the interesting thing about this story is that really, like, when I read the book when I was much younger, and when I watched the original It, and when I watch It now, it's primarily teaching children how to band together against abusive adult forces in order to fight those forces. Like, it's teaching them skills, like learning and coping skills, right? Like,
absolutely.
And the kids, like they're friends, you know. It's in the remake of It, they're talking about, like, essentially the kids, you know, have all their differences and they work through these differences in order to defeat the greater threat. And these actors that play these kids in It, right? They're great. And the guy that plays Pennywise the clown, Bill Skarsgård, he's also fantastic, right? And for me personally, Pennywise is a fantastic antagonist. He's doing exactly what he was set there in the text to do, right? Like, he's literally there to be the antagonist, to be this eldritch source of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And Pennywise, whether it is the old Pennywise or the new Pennywise, is a fantastic version of an antagonist. Like, it's a really great example of storytelling. But the antis have misunderstood this idea that, okay, you can't even like the antagonist for fulfilling the role of an antagonist, because that makes you problematic. Like, what? Like, it's just ridiculous. Because and
it's just like, why do you consume media at all if villains and conflict isn't permissible in the media you're consuming? Why don't you just, I don't know, bake a cupcake or something?
Stay offline. Triggered.
Yeah. Nat, do you agree with that? Like,
yeah, from a higher level perspective, it's really strange to me when we talk about policing the horror fandom, because, you know, that in itself is a really interesting group of fans who have a high tolerance for a lot of bullshit, and I'm assuming also, you know,
that's the way of putting it.
Yeah, so I find that to be like the best Schadenfreude possible. How naive and delusional do you have to be?
Yeah, and it's also worth noting, I think, that they're not going into the Scream fandom or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre fandom and policing these people because it's not topical. Because
they go after the thing that's the most popular. That is one thing we should note about the anti-fandoms. Or like they always go after what is the most popular. And it's the reason why Star Wars was attacked as much as it was after The Force Awakens, and it's the reason why it has suddenly been, like, you know, infected by this everything is problematic gene, you know. And it's like because it is a huge success for a horror movie. How much did it make domestically? Like 143 million or something like
more
that.
Than that. I thought it was, I don't know. I'm actually going to look that up. But yeah, it more than doubled expectations. Nobody expected it to be as successful as it was.
Yeah, I went in with little to no expectations for it because of my history of reading and watching Stephen King adaptations. I'm sure everybody has had the
that's a podcast on its own.
Oh yeah, I love him so much, but he's hilariously dated in some senses, right? I mean,
he has quirks.
So we're at 417 million box office.
Wow.
417 million domestic?
1 second.
Oh gosh, that's huge.
I'm so happy for them. I'm excited for the sequel as well.
250 domestic, and another. I mean, that's still insane
for a horror movie.
For a horror movie.
For a horror movie, that's a quarter of what Star Wars did, and that's Star Wars.
Holy shit! Yeah, but
okay. Now that we've covered the
wait, we have to cover. We have to
talk
about the Clownfucking.
Exactly. We can't not talk about clownfucking. So, you know, I'm a bit of an objective observer here. I know that Erin's a little bit more involved. I can say that Bill is one of the handsomest Skarsgårds.
Okay.
Although, yeah.
Erin, should Erin and I just talk about the clownfucking because we are both heavily involved.
Okay, yeah, please feel free.
And that's just like, sure, take it off my hands.
That's like, I don't want to be caught saying this.
Oh no, I'm perfectly fine. I am not attracted to the clown. Yeah, the actor underneath it, maybe.
I'm not attracted. I should clarify. I actually am terrified of clowns.
Same.
I hate them in concept.
I would totally spite ship stuff.
Well, that's what it is. It's a spite ship for me. Like, I think clowns are one of the most heinous, perverse creations that mankind has ever produced. And I'm not attracted to them, but I think the fact that antis have said, no, you can't do that so many times that like a year ago, I never would have been as into the concepts of these movies like The Shape of Water or the Clownfucking, because like, I didn't care. I was never identified as a monster fucker, but now I'm just sort of like, yes, I am attracted to the other. I am attracted to, these grimdark McEdgelord things because people keep saying that I'm not allowed to be.
And the thing is too, like, so we should clarify that there is two types of clown fuckers. God, we're gonna get the clown fucking fandom on our backs about this too.
I love them. I think they're heroes.
They're good people.
I follow all of them. I love what they're doing.
So there's people that have an actual clown kink. So like, props to you, whatever kink you got, right?
Yeah,
and
no, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then there is people that are like a one clown kind of woman, right? You are just it because of Bill Skarsgård. So anyways, the It movie came out, and then all of a sudden, all these mainstream media outlets started publishing
clickbait articles
about actually the actor that plays Pennywise. You'd never guess
he's so hot, and we're so confused.
You would never think that let me clutch my pearls here. An attractive actor? No. So,
well, I saw an interview with Bill Skarsgård where people were like, "So how do you feel about being the hot clown?" And he was like, "I don't know. Like, I just feel sort of surprised that people are shocked that there's a contrast between me and the clown." Like, people are.
Anyways, so It came out, and then a whole bunch of people decided they wanted to fuck Pennywise the clown, and this consisted of people that actually had a clown kink, and people that were into Bill Skarsgård, and also spite shippers who knew immediately that antis would get really jimmied by this, so they were like, "Oh God, we have to ship it just to piss them off."
Trolling them.
So it became this giant. So the clown fucking emerged, and in particular, this one trope of Pennywise paired with the reader, And Erin, do you want to describe what this trope is exactly?
I mean, most of the time it involves a storm drain, and it has, it's this concept of Pennywise inviting you into his sewer, and the erotic fear of going into Pennywise's sewer. And from like what I've read on some of these people's blogs, they're very much into the idea of Pennywise inviting them down into his sewer and fucking them and killing them, and that's erotic for them. Props to them.
It is this kink that's on.
Yeah, we don't kink
right?
shame on this podcast.
Yeah. To each their own. Like it's your kink is not my kink, which is another episode too.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the emergence of the Pennywise and reader clown fucking fandom emerged, and Tumblr
because it's not like people aren't interested in seeing Pennywise and Beverly, or I haven't really seen that. It's more about just this, I think, personal thrill and eroticism of fucking the villain, whereas whereas in Star Wars, there's more, like Kylo and Rey actually share like a weird, subtextual dynamic where they're actually engaging with each other on like an emotional level. Whereas, with Pennywise, he's just an antagonist in its purest form,
Exactly.
And so people are attracted to that and they're interested in exploring,
Well, I think, I knew a lot of people that were obsessed with a Pinhead from Hellraiser as an erotic figure.
That is a thing. Yeah. People are really into Pinhead. Pinhead's great.
I'm fanning myself right now. That's me. But Tumblr fucking lost it, right? And Tumblr lost it to the point where, because like the aunties decided, like, they started clutching their pearls so hard they had to grab their snipping salts. And of course, this just fueled the horror fandom, who was like, you seriously think we're going to give a shit about being, correct? This is the horror fandom. And by definition, it's quote unquote problematic because it's all about villains and like really, really dark stuff.
Gore and death.
Pretty much, yeah. So Tumblr lost it. Tumblr lost it to the point that mainstream media started picking up on it and writing fucking articles about this hot clown, epidemic that they had started, right?
Big entertainment sites like EW and BuzzFeed and, the Mary Sue did one. But, I mean, there were like 10 articles. People were sending them to me like, hey, I think you might be interested. And I was like, okay, guilty as charged.
Yeah.
So everyone is now talking about clownfucking, right? And, gosh, there is nothing sacred. Well, no, not really. So it's been really interesting to watch that drama from the outside for the most part, actually, because for the past 2 years we've been involved or in the thick of the breakdown in fandom spaces, which has been a little bit entertaining.
It's been great watching it from afar, watching the meltdown.
Yeah, and you wonder how long that's going to last, too, because obviously, I think for something like Star Wars, where it's a sustained trilogy, and we know that the antis in the Star Wars fandom, like, they live and exist and breathe to just
run their hate blogs.
Yeah, run their hate blogs.
Which people.
They're more obsessed with the content than we are, which is hilarious, but also sad. And they're not, and I like explicitly, people are not attacking the creators for the content that they disapprove of. They're only attacking. Oh, well, yeah, they are.
Yeah, sorry to break it to you in that, they are.
Yeah, it took them 2 years, though.
I know, but I've been seeing the anti-Ryan Johnson as a tag now, as well as anti-J.J. Abrams.
Oh, that's nice. Like they ever are going to really care about that.
Yeah, I mean, what's an ant to a boot?
Yeah, I loved Ryan's reaction to that girl on Twitter who was like, I can see that you're angry, Anne, or whatever, right?
Yeah, I can see you're very upset about this, Anne.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can see you're upset about this, Anne.
That's what happens when you add.
That voice from Howl 9000.
You're very upset about this, Anne.
Yes. Yeah. We'll use that take. But it just makes it's just really going to be interesting to see how this continues to perpetuate, because I do feel like this is a roller coaster, merry-go-round that we're going to have to be on for the rest of our lives.
That's Bones, and Nat is fulfilling her image as a crone and a harpy witch with her cat living alone.
With my dumb, fat cat.
Oh, shoot.
All right. So, by the time this podcast comes out, it should be our favorite holiday, Halloween. It's my favorite holiday. I don't know about you girls, but. So, we're going to go over some recommendations we have in this theme. Cheyenne, did you want to start first?
Yeah, and I should note that we will always have recommendations every week.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to seem somewhat Halloween-y times when it's not Halloween, because we just love things like vampires and demons and witches and werewolves, etc.
Yeah. So, like, in terms of my recs, I've picked, because Nat, you told us to pick like 2 or 3, right, for each of us, make sure we didn't go too far over. So I decided to go with one that's fairly well known and one not so much. So, like, the first one that I would recommend if people haven't seen it yet is the 1999 Sleepy Hollow movie. Christina Ricci and Johnny Depp and Christopher Walken.
I love the tone of that movie.
Same here. Oh gosh, it's great. Like, putting aside the recent drama with Johnny Depp, which is something else entirely, like the movie on its own is a great example of gothic horror. And it's one of my favorite adaptations of the Sleepy Hollow legend. And it's got this, because it's this like really great, it's got these really great aesthetics that is a combination of gothic horror and America's supernatural fiction, which is actually a genre onto its own. Like, you guys have got this really unique blend for it, right? And it's really nice seeing that on film.
Sleepy Hollow was always my favorite horror fairy tale growing up.
Yeah.
America too, right? Like, there's this heavy use of subtext in the film, and this like ongoing. Sorry, I'm going over subtext again. I know I shouldn't be talking about it, but like, there is this ongoing theme of women being wronged and how it plays into the idea of witchcraft in Sleepy Hollow, and I really like that. My one major criticism of that is that the subtext and this theme is sacrificed for the visual aesthetics, and the characterization falls a little bit flat. But if you were looking for something really pretty to look at, Sleepy Hollow is definitely it. My next, gosh, I sound like been smoking all day. It's the new weather, right? Like we've got snow outside, so like the weather's changed and it's colder and stuff too. And it's not even October yet. Well, it will be October by the time this comes out. But the other one is, like, the other recommendation I had, which probably most people won't know about, is called The Night Inside by Nancy Barker. And it's this extremely obscure vampire novel from the 90s that is set in Toronto, Canada. And I pulled this from Goodreads because this is actually quite funny as to how their little synopsis is so banal, right? Like and it's like so many tropes that they actually did well. So from Goodreads, it says grad student Ardith Alexander is abducted off the street and forced to feed a hungry vampire nightly. Dmitry Rosakov, a Russian aristocrat and vampire, has just awoken from almost 100 years of sleep and finds himself held captive for an unknown nefarious purpose. On the surface, that's what the book is about. But what this write-up does not tell you is that the vampire and Ardith have been captured by snuff filmmakers who are using the vampire in a nightly porno shoot.
That's awesome.
And that it's not about, and that the story is not about redemption, and it's actually an Ardith decides to go a dark side, and it's actually very out there, like the whole story is, and it's one of the few examples of vampire fiction done in a modern setting with like that high school grad school trope that's done really well that I actually really like. And I'm recommending it because it is a great example of non-mainstream vampire fiction, and it's part of the historical literature of the genre prior to it really taking off and undergoing an evolution to become like a young adult staple, because that's where you normally see vampires these days, right?
Yeah.
It's a pretty dark novel. There's tons of blood kink, and it's like really sensual in the right way that it's written. And the downside though is it's out of print, so I feel really bad for recommending this. Like it's no longer in production; you have to hunt it down. But it's
a tragedy.
So good.
I was just thinking Sleepy Hollow. I actually got to visit Sleepy Hollow, New York last year when I was living up there, and it was really great. It was a really pretty town. I just kind of went up there. They had like an Oktoberfest, and they have a historic cemetery there, and so nice. It actually is kind of a spooky, beautiful town. But the cemetery is historic because a lot of sort of like founding economic tycoons, like the Rockefellers and Andrew Carnegie, and a bunch of essentially just famous old Wall Streeters and robber barons and things like that are buried up there, and so is Washington Irving. But it was really gorgeous. It was like a big hilly cemetery with all these weeping willows, and there were pumpkins throughout, and it was super, super spooky. I loved it. Yeah. So I recommend visiting Sleepy Hollow if any of you listeners ever get the chance. I guess my recommendations, I have to go ahead and recommend the It miniseries from 1990 with Tim Curry, because although I loved Bill Skarsgård's interpretation, there is something so, like I said earlier, just heinous and perverse about Tim Curry's vaudeville interpretation of the clown that just speaks to my soul on a spiritual level. Like, he's a human shitpost. He's a formidable actor. I really love what he did with that miniseries. So I think that it's worth a watch. It's more entertaining than scary in my opinion. But yeah, I recommend that. And then the other one I want to recommend is a novel called Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I don't know how many of you may have heard of her, but she's been writing for a long time. She primarily writes about dragons. This is sort of a different take on her dragon passion, though. It's a spin on Howl's Moving Castle, and it's about a sorcerer that abducts a girl, and she cooks and cleans and things like that in his tower, and learns sorcery. But I think it was really, really well written. It's sort of a cult hit within the young and new adult genre readers, although I think it's technically classified as adult literature because I have only ever seen it in the adult sci-fi and fantasy shelf, like at Barnes & Noble and things. I've never actually seen it in the young adult section, and that's because it's got some adult themes, but it's really, really enjoyable. I think it's meaty. I think it's like 150,000 words, and the characterization is really great, and I'm a stickler about prose, and I really enjoyed it, so highly recommend that to anybody who hasn't read it, who's looking for something good to sink their teeth into.
Yeah, I'm going to second that recommendation. I finished that book in like one evening because it was so good. And
yeah, it's the kind of book that keeps you up all night reading.
Yep. So, moving on to my recommendations, I am going to recommend a podcast called Faculty of Horror. The hosts are Andrea Supasati and Alex West. They're two Toronto, Canada sociologists and media critics, and they are very big in the horror fandom as it stands. And basically, they'll touch on typically one or two movies or a franchise within the horror oeuvre. But what they do is they break it down and deconstruct the narratives and the storytelling and some of the themes, and also
within the horror.
Yep, exactly. And also look at it with a very keen eye towards unpacking all the sorts of questions around women, especially, right? A feminist viewpoint of women in horror, because obviously that genre has been plagued by some major, it has had a lot of growing pains coming into its own within the last, 50, 60 years. But they do it in a place of love and also sharing just some very unique horror movies from around the world that I had never heard of and I have not watched, but for me, I can't watch horror very well, so listening to it is a lot easier. I have to hide my eyes. I'm a little baby. So, yeah, and the next one I would be recommending is House of Leaves, and that's by Mark Danielewski. So House of Leaves, Mark Danielewski, and this was published in 2000. It is a very strange book, and what it's called is ergodic literature, which is basically the book is constructed like it's some crazy madman's notes and footnotes and annotations.
Oh, wow, interesting.
And the text is structured on the page to sometimes represent what's going on in the story.
Is it like stream of consciousness?
No, because it's sort of a combination. Almost there's a kind of an epistolary format with basically this guy finds these notes, and this older scholar is putting together a study of the story. And the main story within the text is about a family that moves into a home that turns out to have this really weird phenomenon. Basically, the inside of the house is larger than the outside. They measure it. And then doorways and rooms start to open up, and they find that the house is basically, there's a huge existential labyrinth made of smooth stone that they have to go into, and there's there is a monster inside. It's very, very creepy, very good book, and just exceptionally well done. And I like to reread it every few years just because it's got that it kind of haunts you, So,
are we going to put all these recs in the show notes, by the way, or they will be there? Okay,
absolutely.
Just double check them there.
All right, so we're going to cut to the most important segment of this podcast, which we'll be figuring out as we go.
And what is this most important segment?
I don't think I have a name for it yet, but basically it's where we have questions that we ask each other that we prepared beforehand. And whoever...
And that the other person doesn't know what they are.
Exactly. So who wants to go first?
All right, I am ready. Erin, you're going first, though.
Okay, I'll go first.
All right, who's
going
to
get... I feel like I know what's coming.
Who's going to get roasted first, right?
I know, right?
Okay.
Know thy enemy.
Well.
What do you think of the word Clussy? And I'm going to spell that Clussy. Am I pronouncing that right?
I think it's Clussy.
Clussy.
Oh God.
Should we explain what Clussy is first, though?
Oh yeah. So I actually had this conversation earlier on Tumblr because someone messaged me about it because they were scrolling through the Pennywise tag and saw it and their eyes started bleeding. So people have started giving nicknames to in fandom genitalia, and so Clussy refers to clown pussy, which I guess the it fandom has decided. Well, there's been a lot of discourse around whether or not Pennywise is, if he's gender fluid, if he's a he, if he's an it, what his genitals might look like, and they've decided that Pennywise has a Clussy. Some people say Pennywise has a clock. I don't know. I haven't actively engaged in these discussions. I think the term itself is heinous. It makes me gag every time it comes out of my mouth. But it makes me laugh, so I approve.
Thank you. It's wonderful explaining. All right. Put Cheyenne on the spit roast. Okay.
Oh, boy. Girdle my loins here.
Mm-hmm. It's date night in Middle-earth. Where are you? Cozied in a tent with Baenor? At his Mithrim encampment, eager to bear him more Balrog-slaying sons. Or are you on your knees in Minas Morgul, sliding a ring of power onto the Witch King of Angmar's immortal cock?
Well, this is not even a debate. Witch King, like what? Of course, I'm with
We're all hot
Witch
for
King.
the Witch King of Angmar.
I am totally putting on a cock ring for the Witch King. So like, that's not even a debate here. How dare you just come to me with that weak ass answer?
I just wanted to hear you say it.
All right, next.
Okay, so Aaron, what do you think of the recent spate of breathless sensationalist clown-fucking think pieces that has overtaken the mainstream media? Slow day at the office, or has Bill Skarsgård and his painted mug created a cultural sin-fueled zeitgeist?
I think that it feels like a bit of a kink revolution. I think that people are, I don't know. I don't think it's another day in the office. I think because this is going on, monster fucking is going to start feeling like another day in the office, because I remember like seeing dragon smut on my dashboard like a year ago and being like, whoa. And now I'm seeing clown smut on my dashboard and I don't even blink. So yeah. I don't know. I think it's been a long time coming. So I'm eager to indulge in the wealth of shamelessness to come.
Same. Absolutely. All right. Sophie's choice. BioWare is erasing one of two characters from history, and you must choose which. Garrus Vakarian or Darth Revan.
Sorry, Darth Revan. Garrus will always be number one.
Speaking of monster fucking.
Again, there's no choice.
Garrus is a good boy. Revan is just an edgelord who can easily be, removed.
Replaced by another Sith edgelord.
Exactly.
You like the soft chicken boy.
I do like the soft chicken boy. I'm totally down for the soft chicken boy.
All right. Aaron, was Pinhead your sexual awakening?
Pinhead was not. So I have a good friend who may be listening to this, who Pinhead very well may have been her sexual awakening. So
nice.
That does hit close to home for me. Although, what's his name? Butterball's a close second. But my first villain crush, I don't know if this was Catholic school or just some horrible misfiring of neurons in my brain, but I had a thing for Lord Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah. That was
shoot.
A good one.
With that silly hat.
Well, I mean, he sings about being, aroused, so, who can help themselves?
Spells in the fire. He hated women, though. That doesn't
feel
good.
That's problematic, right?
Just a tad, yeah.
We're going to have a whole episode on villainships, by the way. Because we that's us. So Cheyenne, you've decided to run an obscure fandom discourse blog. Which is your preferred soapbox? Salting about whether or not Pennywise and the Babadook are astrologically compatible based on their inferred zodiac signs, or fighting deep in the trenches of the Vampire Diaries shipping wars?
Oh, I'd have to say Vampire Diaries, because that is the gift that keeps on giving. It never ends, and there is constantly new content. Whereas, Babadook and It is kind of there's a finite end to that. Theoretically, there's a finite end to it. So I'd have to say Vampire Diaries.
And who would you be defending in the shipping wars?
I have honestly no clue, because I know nothing about the series, except that it's been going on for a really long time.
Yeah.
Steroline.
What's
Steroline? No. I like Kara.
No, it's Bonkai.
Bonkai, yeah. We have to represent.
Right, I'll defend Bonkai then. Whatever Bonkai is.
Problematic.
Yeah. It's a villainship.
Oh, okay, sure then. Definitely.
Yeah, actually the ship ended with Bonkai's a witch, and she created a personal prison in another dimension for Kai Parker where she leaves him tied to a chair in a bar. So theoretically she could just go visit him anytime.
It's pretty hot.
Oh, well, okay then.
It's a good ship.
Yeah. All right, Aaron, what are your thoughts on psychic vampirism?
Psychic vampirism? Like what antis do? Or are we talking about mind reading, sucking your thoughts away type?
We're talking about the people who, well, at least my perception of it is, we're talking about the people who think they're vampires, but they don't actually drink blood. They just drink your essence. And they are totally The edgelords that work at McDonald's.
I think we all had that phase when we were like 12 and wanted to be goth,
I was about to
right?
say, so I did this. You guys actually probably don't know this about me, but when I was 10 years old, I was writing a vampire Bible that I called the Book of Dracula, the Book of Jack for short.
Awesome.
And I wrote spells in it and wrote rules for being a vampire and tried to teach myself to fly at sleepovers. And I even ate a few insects because I convinced myself that drinking the blood of moths would sustain me the way that my mother's chicken and broccoli would not.
That's the best story ever. Oh my God.
I'm in tears.
All the skeletons coming out of the closet. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yep.
All right. Do I have one more question?
Yeah. You've agreed to ghostwrite a novel for one of two authors. You must adhere to their canon and mimic their written voice. Stephanie Meyer or Alan Dean Foster?
I should clarify this first. The reason why I'm being asked this is because I have issues with the way that Alan Dean Foster writes his stuff. Let's putting it mildly.
And for those that don't know, Alan Dean Foster has been the writer on most of the original Star Wars novels and the most recent novelization of The Force Awakens.
I'd have to actually say, I'm being totally serious here too, because I know we're doing it funny, but like this is a serious answer to end off an episode that started off serious, I guess. I would actually choose Stephanie Meyer because she was, like, I'm sure we'll do eventually a whole episode on Twilight.
Absolutely.
I want to.
And how legitimate criticisms about Twilight have turned into a slogfest against texts that are written by women for women.
Yeah.
I have to say I am not a fan of her prose or her vampires. I'm really not. But I still prefer her stuff to Alan Dean Foster's, partially because one, she's writing for women and for girls, and two, there's Alan Dean Foster has this. I don't know if you guys have read his works, but he wrote this. He wrote The Force Awakens, or the novelization of The Force Awakens.
Read it.
And he takes care. Yeah, it takes a character like Rey, who is really independent in the movie itself, and makes her into this manic pixie dream girl who is constantly being threatened with rape by aliens. So I don't really like his writing for that reason.
He didn't give Finn a physical description.
Oh gosh, yeah. Ever. His treatment of Finn and characters and the other characters involved in the story is just abysmal. So I would have to definitely say, on a totally serious note, Stephanie Meyer, because while I do have issues with some of the ways that some of the subtext in her writing, at least it's coming from a more genuine place than Alan Dean Foster, who's just cashing a paycheck, and incorrectly at that. So that is my answer. That is my firm answer.
Perfect answer. I think I'd agree with you on that entirely. Well, I think next time we'll have more questions, and maybe you guys can ask me questions, since
all right,
we got to keep it fair. You can't be the only ones being kink shamed on this podcast.
All right, then.
All right.
So on a final note, we would like to let you know where you can find us online. You can find me, Nat, on Tumblr and Twitter as @AshesForFoxes.
You can find me, Erin, on Tumblr and Twitter as @Holocroning.
And for me, Otzi, you can find me blogging at otzi.com, and you spell that OHTZE.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Otzi_O, and it's spelled the same way.
Perfect. And
we also have links. Should we say we also have links to those on our page or whatever, in case people don't know how to spell shit?
That's a good point. You can also find us at metamashina.com, and that's spelled metamashina.com. Or you can follow us on Twitter at Metamashina. If you have any questions for the hosts, please feel free to send those to contact@metamashina.com. Additionally, if you wanted to contact us through the webpage, we do have an About section for ourselves that you are free to click the links through and see our internet infamy.
Hello, world. My name is Maria. I am your personal assistant. I am here to read your thoughts from the internet. Date a man with killer taste in fashion. Date a man with a sense of humor. Date a man who's good with kids. Date a man who's a homicidal, shape-shifting alien. Date Pennywise. How did I do, guys? Guys,